All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for the business case for water infrastructure webinar. I'm Colton Fagundes with the American Sustainable Business Council. I'm joined today with partners from Environment America and Cerulean Environmental Services. So let's get started. Go back to the first slide, actually. So America is fortunate to have thousands of municipal water systems to provide reliable, plentiful, clean drinking water and sanitary waste disposal. But across the country, much of our infrastructure for managing wastewater and providing drinking water is inadequate, obsolete, or seriously deteriorating. Continued failure to address this major infrastructure problem is detrimental to our economy, businesses nationwide, and if we do not make the necessary water infrastructure investments, there will be significant impacts to our economy. On the other hand, if we do make the investments, there will be job creation, better competitive position for US businesses, and a more resilient economic growth. So today we have a great group, a wide variety of people listening in on this webinar, spanning businesses, leaders, investors, clean water advocates, policymakers, and these are the kinds of people that we need to get all in the same room, whether or not it's a virtual room or not. And our hope is to really elevate the business case for this important issue and to advance public policy, responsible private sector coordination, so that we can make the necessary investments in water infrastructure and build a healthier, more prosperous communities and economies. So the American Sustainable Business Council, quick overview here of our work, our campaigns. We have about 250,000 businesses in our membership in a wide variety of industries. We advocate for policy change, inform business owners, policymakers, and the public about the need for a vibrant, prosperous, sustainable economy. So to get started with today's run of the show, I'll introduce myself, Colton Fagundes, Policy Manager at ASBC. I'm going to speak today, broad overview of the issues of water infrastructure and the business case for water infrastructure. Moving on, Laura Miller, clean water advocate at Environment America. She's going to talk a little bit about a business sign-on letter that we've been working on together in collaboration that's calling on the Senate, calling for emergency water infrastructure funding and appropriations. And she's also going to go over some case studies from a recent report from Environment America on federally funded water infrastructure projects. Then Susan Harris of Cerulean Environmental Services is going to go into the green stormwater infrastructure, nature-based solutions, the potential, and the business case. And then our special guest is going to join us at 12:30, Senator Jack Reed. He'll be getting on a little bit before that, and he will be talking about some of the work he's been doing to champion water infrastructure in the Senate, and we'll also allow some time for questions. So to get started, what's the problem? So we have a large national investment gap in water infrastructure. Recent estimates project that the nation needs a total investment of $129 billion per year from 2019 to 2039 to achieve a state of good repair. But annual state, local, and federal funding only amounts to $48 billion, creating a $121 billion annual gap. I'll note, as Susan's going to go into later, this potential cost could be less if green infrastructure and nature-based solutions are considered. So increasing federal investment for addressing the nation's failing water infrastructure will likely be vital for meeting our needs. The local and state government share spending has more than doubled over the last 40 years, while the federal funding has dropped from $76 per person in 1977 to $11 per person in 2014. Failure to invest in water infrastructure is directly and indirectly impairing economic activity. Increasing service rates and fees, service disruptions, and flooding increase production costs for businesses and shrink the purchasing power of households, especially for low-income households, as they are spending more to attain essential water and cope with flooding damages. Further, the higher prices as a result of these disruptions create higher prices for goods that are potentially depressing foreign demand for US manufactured goods. So going over some of the figures here, the American Society of Civil Engineers and some others have calculated moving into the future, service disruptions will actually start off current day. Business losses can range from $230 to $5,800 in sales per employee per day for a single day of disruption. Those upper numbers are for the industries that are more water intensive. But moving into the future, projections show that as much as $732 billion in lost business sales by 2029 and over 4.5 trillion by 2039. This is going to potentially lead to 333,000 jobs lost by 2029 and 636,000 by 2039. So what could be the benefits of investing in water infrastructure? Making the necessary investments could lead to $5.6 trillion in increased business sales and over 800,000 jobs created by 2039. These investments would spur economic growth by creating opportunities in the design, engineering, and construction of water infrastructure, where jobs are stable, well-paying, and have an average wage of $63,000. And further, it could indirectly increase demand for machinery, equipment, and primary materials. Further, businesses across sectors would see increased productivity and efficiency from reliable water services, freeing up capital for investment in operations and management spending. In turn, households will generate economic activity through their increased spending on personal goods and services from their wage growth, and through their savings and lost from avoided service disruptions and avoided needing to deal with the nuisance of flooding. So these numbers that I was going over earlier, they actually do not encompass the potential impacts on the economy from pollution as a result of failing water infrastructure. If you actually were to consider the impacts of water pollution, those numbers I just went over would be much higher. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any sort of comprehensive integration of that sort of economic data into the research. So just going to go over it in more general terms. This is what we do a lot at our Clean Water is Good for Business campaign at ASBC. Sorry, one moment. I'm having a technical issue. Okay, there we go. Water pollution can impact businesses across many sectors. When pollution forces localities to shut down water bodies to swimmers or impacts other recreation, tourism, nearby restaurants, boating companies, lodging, fishing gear suppliers, and other amenities and service providers could suffer. The more polluted the nearby water body is in general, the less likely customers are to visit its scenic and recreational attractions. This can reduce incomes for local businesses. Further, of course, beverage and food manufacturers are impacted by water pollutions. Pollutants in their water can create unwanted tastes and products in their products and increase operation costs for purification. For example, beer is around 9% water and it's very sensitive to any impurities. So improving water infrastructure would significantly help to clean up waterways across the country, primarily through reducing stormwater runoff and preventing combined sewage system overflows. Every year, 900 billion gallons of untreated wastewater and stormwater released into water bodies. So Laura is going to go over these issues in a little more detail in a minute, but I'm just going to focus on a couple case studies briefly where these pollution issues are affecting businesses. So we are working with a company in North Carolina, currently on an op-ed. They're an outdoor and camping supplier. It's outside of Raleigh, where urban stormwater and combined sewage overflows from the nearby towns are running into rivers and creeks and then traveling downstream into Falls Lake, which is one of the biggest camping destinations nearby. Because of this pollution, officials are frequently having to issue no swim advisories and occasionally have to close off areas of the lake to visitors. So the outdoor rec business that we're working with realizes that if the situation continues to get worse, a small business risks losing customers. So the state of North Carolina is making the city of Raleigh and Durham take measures to reduce their pollution from entering the lake, but the cost of compliance is high and it's causing political controversy. This is a situation where increased federal assistance could be a major help in ensuring clean waterways and a resilient local economy in North Carolina. To go over another case that we've been working on recently in Lake Hopatcong in New Jersey. In 2019, the beaches around the lake were closed for swimmers due to toxic algae outbreaks. So these outbreaks are caused when stormwater runoff carrying phosphorus feeds the algae outbreaks, which can cause a variety of adverse health effects, and if ingested can be dangerous, especially dangerous and deadly for pets and children. We've been working with a boating company on the lake that was severely impacted during the 2019 closure. Even though boats are technically allowed on the lake during the outbreak, when people can't swim, they just often cancel their trips altogether. And this loss in tourism is affecting businesses across the lake and across other lakes in New Jersey as these issues continue to get worse. This last summer, there was no outbreaks in Lake Hopatcong, but still tourism was slow. Part of the reason is that there's been damage done to the lake's reputation, and people are not considering anymore for their vacations as much as they used to. So agriculture is generally a main driver of these outbreaks, but in this case, it's actually combined sewage overflows and urban stormwater runoff. And green stormwater infrastructure is being proposed as one of the potential solutions, as Susan's going to go over in a bit. So why the business case for water infrastructure? Why do we care about the business case for water infrastructure? What does that mean? Well, we've been going over that. You know, the public health case, the environmental justice case, the conservation case for water infrastructure, clean water, these are all important, vital, and we all care about these. What we're trying to do here with this campaign and through elevating the business case, through creating business messaging, is to reach certain people, policymakers, the media, the public that might be more amenable to this sort of messaging than other types of messaging. And in the end, you know, we're kind of trying to overcome that cliche divide between, you know, the environment versus jobs, as we've shown here. This is an issue where taking care of the environment, taking care of public health means creating jobs. It means growing the economy. It also means protecting businesses. So as Laura's about to talk about right now, this is especially important in this moment as we are potentially in a position to advocate for improvements to our water infrastructure programs. So Laura, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colton, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. I'm just gonna make a quick note that if at any point my video or my audio cut out, please just drop a note in the chat and I'm gonna switch over to my phone. But fingers crossed, my computer loves Zoom today. We have no problems. With that, I'm Laura Miller. I'm Clean Water Advocate with Environment America. We're a citizen-supported advocacy organization working to protect our air, water, and land. We have state affiliates in 29 states and members in all 50 states. My current focus is securing funding for water infrastructure, which will address a lot of the infrastructure problems and types of pollution that Colton mentioned. Just yesterday, I was on a call with several people from my organization, and when we started talking about clean water, two of my colleagues immediately piped up saying they had personal stories of how they were impacted by dirty water. One of them was actually in Raleigh, North Carolina, so it's funny that you mentioned that. My colleague of mine took her dog out for a walk. The dog got in the water, went swimming, and developed a pretty bad skin rash. She had to go to the vet, and turns out the vet thinks that it was probably a rash from after coming in contact with contaminated water. Unfortunately, illnesses like that are not uncommon. Every year, around 57 million cases of swimmers are suffering with waterborne illnesses. So my point really is that clean water is essential no matter how it touches your life, whether it's the water in our rivers and bays where we like to swim, whether it's helping your community provide jobs, especially right now when our economy could really use that boost, whether it's clean water from faucets, which of course are important because we're washing our hands and disinfecting our homes, or just because we love the healthy ecosystems across our country. Clean water matters to everyone in some way. I strongly believe that. And right now, we have one way that we can improve water quality, which is investing in our water infrastructure. And this is especially timely as the House and Senate are negotiating a final budget. They have a deadline of December 11th to pass that budget before we go into a government shutdown, which nobody is looking to have right now. Many in the clean water advocacy community are advocating for robust water infrastructure funding with money set aside for green infrastructure projects and provisions to make sure that that money is accessible and affordable to all communities. So like we've kind of been talking about, there are so many reasons why Americans support clean water. And I see it as my job as to highlight that support to our elected officials. And one way we're doing that, like Colton mentioned, Environment America, ASBC, and a couple other partners in clean water are working together on a national business sign-on letter. This letter, which I will drop the link to in the chat, will be delivered to Congress to show that clean water is important for businesses and the people who run them. Your voice as a business leader is incredibly valuable. Some legislators are probably quite used to hearing calls from me, seeing emails from folks who do work like me, who are fighting for clean water. But like Colton said, we have an opportunity here to bridge a divide that I think a lot of folks expect to see between the environmental community and businesses, because we're coming together and advocating for an issue that impacts us all. And I think that's very attention grabbing and very persuasive. And this business letter highlights that very well. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to sign on. We'll be delivering this letter about a week after Thanksgiving, so you have some time to look it over, maybe get the necessary permissions if that's something you need to do. Another way that I'm advocating for clean water funding in Congress is through a report that will be released in about 2 weeks. The report includes case studies of water infrastructure projects from around the country that successfully improve water quality. As you can imagine, my personal favorites are those with green infrastructure. The cases really show how that these natural systems can improve and protect water quality while decreasing flooding, increasing resiliency, providing wildlife habitat and open space for communities. But gray infrastructure has its value as well, especially when it comes to updating our woefully underfunded and failing wastewater systems, which are experiencing added pressure from severe storms and sea level rise. I will mention a brief caveat here. We don't talk too much about the pollution that Colton mentioned, agriculture pollution, which can cause a lot of those fish kills and algal outbreaks. This is an equally important issue, but has a slightly different solution, and so we tend to address it separately. So my main goal with this report is to make it clear that investing in clean water infrastructure works, and it's something that should be prioritized. And I'd love to share an example with you of the benefits of these projects. Given the fact that Senator Reed, a clean water champion from Rhode Island, is joining us today, I'll be highlighting my Rhode Island example. It takes place in the town of Bristol. Bristol Town Beach on Narragansett Bay is a classic example of what the Bay brings to Ocean State residents. You have swimming, you have outdoor recreation classes, summer camps, and other activities. Unfortunately, the beach was once regularly closed to swimming because of fecal matter bacteria in the waters right there. When they did some digging, they found that the source of that bacteria was probably from wildlife, so geese dropping their waste and having that wash into the beach, parking lot runoff, stormwater discharges from nearby neighborhoods, which makes me think pet waste was getting left in yards and the rain was washing it towards the beach. And then failing septic systems were leaking as well. So to address all of these issues, the town implemented a variety of green infrastructure projects to prevent pollution at the source and filter stormwater runoff pollution before it could reach the beach. They installed rain gardens and stormwater basins throughout the parking lot. They planted 125 trees to deter the geese from dropping their waste by the water, and they planted a buffer of native grasses along the beach. While doing this, they also incorporated some gray infrastructure by moving the folks who were using those failing septic systems onto a sewer system. The project was funded by one of the federal sources that we are advocating for, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Oh, thank you for posting that business letter in the chat. It was funded in part by one of the things that we are advocating for and was hugely successful. The new green infrastructure filters around 12 million gallons of stormwater every single year. Beach closures were eliminated in 2013 after the project was completed, and that led to an increase in $50,000 of revenue for the beach over 5 years. Even during COVID, the rec center there was offering socially distant outdoor summer camps and fitness classes, which I think is a very creative way to get people outside and enjoying nature. So while this project and others in my report have very clear positive results, there's more work that needs to be done. In Narragansett Bay alone, there's 2.2 billion gallons of sewage overflows every year. And Senator Reed might talk a little bit about the fact that a lot has been done in Rhode Island to address these, but these projects take time and they take investment, and a little bit more is needed. So for the Am I
Lori,
back?
you cut out for a minute, but now we can hear you again.
Are we back? Okay. Well, I'm not totally sure where I came out, but I was just referencing the business letter that was dropped in. And I think that Colton will share my contact information towards the end of the presentation. So if you have questions after today's webinar, if you are looking for other ways to get involved, please, by all means, send me an email and reach out. So with that, thank you all so much. And I am going to pass the Zoom microphone over to Susan Harris, who's principal at Cerulean.
Great, thank you, Laura. My name is Susan Harris, and as Laura had mentioned, I am the principal at Cerulean LLC. It's an environmental consulting firm in the greater Philadelphia area. We are a steering committee member on the American Sustainable Business Council's Clean Water is Good for Business initiative. Our efforts at Cerulean are focused on implementation of green stormwater infrastructure to improve the quality of drinking water and serve as a solution to remedy aging green infrastructure and high levels of impervious surface. Following the Stormwater Management Act in 1978, Pennsylvania regulation began to incorporate local ordinances which required stormwater control measures into development practices. Prior to this, it was common practice that stormwater was piped directly from the creeks and rivers without any rate reduction or filtration. This approach has proved detrimental to the health of our watersheds. Majority of the waterways in the greater Philadelphia region are listed as impaired and not meeting their designated water uses. We are looking towards green stormwater infrastructure as a solution to retrofit the landscape and reduce the volume and velocity of stormwater runoff and clean the water before it reaches the creek. The types of projects in the examples I will share next are proven to reduce pollutant loads, cool water temperatures, and minimize flooding and combined sewer overflows downstream. Next slide. These illustrations you see here are an example of clogged and deteriorating infrastructure. This scenario is all too common in our aging communities where impervious areas are maxed out and we have less green space available to mitigate for stormwater runoff. Clogged and non-functioning stormwater systems lead to flooding and damage of both public and private property. I'm going to share a few examples of how we're addressing this and how implementation of green stormwater infrastructure is helping to solve these issues and provide environmental, social, and economic benefits. On this slide you see here, through the Delaware River Watershed Initiative and other watershed planning efforts, we are identifying locations where existing stormwater infrastructure can be retrofitted to maximize stormwater capture, reduce gray infrastructure, and clean the water in the most cost-effective approach. We're doing this by locating green space and vacant lands where the existing stormwater infrastructure flows through the site or adjacent to. These lands serve as ideal locations for intercepting existing stormwater conveyance. In this scenario, as you see here in the photo on the left, we have 42 acres of commercial and residential properties conveyed towards inlets and piped to the outfall. The photo shown on the right is that collective drainage area. It includes many businesses, 144 small lot residential, plus large condominium complexes. Below the outfall was a hard armored concrete collapsing line channel that was constructed in the late 1970s. In this condition, flows were quickly moving from this outfall to the nearby creek. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. As evident in the photo on the left here, this channel did not provide for any water quality treatment or opportunity to reduce the volume and velocity of the stormwater runoff. This project remedied the situation by removing the hard armoring and replicating a natural meandering channel, which improved groundwater recharge, filtration, and provided stormwater storage within the available green space. There's a berm on the downslope side of the project, which provides a shallow impoundment for stormwater storage and settling of pollutants and debris. The project was further added to create an aesthetically appealing, naturalized garden space, along with a hiking path throughout the feature. Next slide. Thank you. Throughout our suburban Philadelphia communities, where development postdates stormwater management regulations, we have large crater-looking stormwater basins dotting the landscape, similar to the photo that you see in the top left here. Basins built in the late 1970s and early 1980s are now showing signs of deterioration. It's not uncommon to find detached outlet structures, broken concrete low flow channels, and erosion causing short circuiting and malfunctioning of the stormwater basins. Next slide, as well as attracting geese. I'll add to Laura's point that she made, these features really, with the mowed turf grass, they are a source of goose populations within the stormwater basins. So throughout, these challenged aging systems present opportunity to retrofit existing infrastructure and improve functionality. As you can see in the example here, flows from 156-acre sewer shed are entering the basin, and they were previously quickly exiting through the eroded channel to the outlet structure. 85% of the basin footprint was not being utilized during typical storm events. So we remedied this by extending the flow path and using the entire footprint of the basin to pass the flows through, slow them down, filter out pollutants. So this was a cost-effective way of utilizing the existing stormwater infrastructure that was conveying this 156-acre drainage area to the basin. We utilized that infrastructure and were able to provide upgrades to help this function more environmentally sound. This is fortunate in some of our suburban communities where we have opportunity to retrofit this existing infrastructure. However, in many of our older, more dense communities, we lack any existing stormwater basins. Next slide.
Hi, Susan, the senator has joined us, so sorry to interrupt, and I'm going to let you finish. The senator has minimal time with us today.
Sure, yep, no problem. Yeah. I'm glad to finish after he speaks.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you had any last thoughts or words, otherwise I'll turn it over to the senator.
I think it's perfect. I'll wrap up after he's done.
Okay, great.
Good timing.
Thank you. Hi, Senator. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. So introducing Senator Reed, just a few short words. Senator Reed was born in Cranston, Rhode Island. He attended West Point and graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at the top of his class, going on to receive a law degree from Harvard. He served in the 82nd Airborne Division as an infantry platoon leader, a company commander, and a battalion staff officer. Then entered a life of public service and was elected to the House of Representatives in 1990, to the Senate in 1996. Amongst his many accomplishments in Congress, relevant to us today especially, is his work to advance water infrastructure programs and secure funding. So Senator, please take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Colton, for that very kind introduction and for inviting me to speak with you all today about the state of our nation's water infrastructure and the urgent need for investment. Too often we take for granted that we're guaranteed safe drinking water through our taps, so forget the essential role that wastewater systems play in protecting public health and environment. One reason is that we most of our infrastructure is underground. We don't see it. We don't realize that in some places we have 100-year-old pipes that need replacing, and this is an issue that we have to deal with. Significant investments are in fact needed to install, upgrade, or replace infrastructure to continue to ensure access to safe drinking water. And that's only possible if the communities have the resources to do that. That's why I've partnered with my colleagues, Senator Mike Crapo from Idaho and Senator Ben Cardin from Maryland, to lead a bipartisan effort to support funding for the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds each fiscal year. For fiscal year 2021, 48 senators, including 8 Republicans, joined our call for robust funding for both SRFs. The recently released FY21 Senate Appropriations Bill included over $1.6 billion for the Clean Water SRF and over $1.1 billion for the Drinking Water SRF. And since the beginning of the program, the federal government has invested $68 billion in water infrastructure through the SRFs, which in turn have generated a total investment of $179 billion. But we all recognize there's much, much more work to be done. In my home state of Rhode Island, the Infrastructure Bank, which is a state agency, has invested over $2.1 billion in our water infrastructure. And one of the other things that this investment does is generates jobs. In fact, we've estimated that the Rhode Island investment has generated 62,000 jobs. These are our investments are a win-win. They help our environment, they improve public health, and they grow our economy. For example, the town of Bristol in Rhode Island received $1 million from the state bank to make a green infrastructure investment to reduce stormwater runoff. This investment reduced the number of beach closure days, which in turn increased tourism revenue for local businesses. It was, again, a win-win. SRF funding can also help local communities adapt to the realities of climate change. Warren, Rhode Island, received $20 million from the State Infrastructure Bank to increase the resiliency of the wastewater treatment facility, allowing it to better withstand the harmful effects of climate change. It is the first wastewater treatment facility in Rhode Island to incorporate flood protection measures, but I can tell you there are many, many more that have to do that, given climate change and given rising seawaters. We're the ocean state for a reason, so we will have to take this protection. As we face this compounding crisis of climate change, recovery from the COVID, economic repercussions from COVID, we still have to make these investments. It won't come easy and it won't happen overnight, but the results are definitely positive when it does. For Rhode Islanders, efforts to improve water quality in Narragansett Bay, for example, and have been significantly appropriate and not only relevant, but they've made a real difference. When I was growing up as a kid in Cranston, Rhode Island, and this is about the 1950s or 60s, we called the Patuxent River, which is the major river flowing through our city, the Stinky River. And guess what? They don't call it the Stinky River anymore. We've made a tremendous amount of progress thanks to federal investment in wastewater treatment facilities, which have led to a significant decline in runoff. And as a result, water quality in Narragansett Bay has improved dramatically. For example, since the 1990s, the Narragansett Bay Commission has worked to implement its combined sewer overflow project to collect runoff before it enters our waters. When fully constructed, it will capture about 90% of runoff to be treated before it goes into the bay. And this is one of the most important and largest water quality projects in Rhode Island history, yet again, people don't notice it because it's almost entirely underground. But they will notice the results. Since the first 2 phases of the tunnel project went into effect, it captured over 11 billion gallons of untreated wastewater. As a result, bacterial levels in the bay have dropped by 50%, and the levels of nutrients have dropped to half of what they were in the 1990s. This year, the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management could remove the upper Narragansett Bay from its list of waters of concern because of the combined sewer outflow project. Just one sign of the progress that we're making. Because of the improvement in water quality, the state has been able to open up thousands of new acres for shellfish farming, helping grow an important local industry. Again, the win-win of environmental investment and jobs, good jobs and long-term jobs for Rhode Islanders. This project would not have been possible without federal support, most recently from the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act funding. There is widespread recognition that we must address our nation's deteriorating infrastructure. And as we look ahead to the next Congress and new administration, there's a real opportunity for bipartisan action on this initiative. Water infrastructure absolutely should be part of that package, and this is why your advocacy is so important. Elevating stories like examples from Rhode Island, which demonstrate the local benefits that programs like SRF and WIFIA bring to both the economy and environment, is critical to building the support for funding. And all politics is local, as Tip O'Neill reminded us. So the more you connect with your local representatives in Congress and you tell them about the local initiatives and the local progress you're making with these funds, that is a very powerful and persuasive argument to support increased investment. So I encourage you to make these relationships. Again, thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm happy to take a few questions. You're doing tremendous work, both for the environment and for the economy. Please keep it up. Thank you, Colton.
Thank you, Senator. Really appreciate you joining us. Yeah, we have some questions for you. And while I'm going ahead with these, if anyone else in the audience has questions for the Senator or for the rest of the panel, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box and we will get to them when we can. So you kind of, you covered so much that you already sort of addressed parts of my question, but I'll go ahead and
I can do it again. We do that in the Senate a lot.
Yeah.
Redundancy is one of our best skills.
Well, great. Okay, there we go. So first question we had here were, what are your thoughts on how the results of the recent elections may shape the possibilities for water infrastructure programs moving forward into the next Congress and into the next administration?
Well, I think it has a tremendous advantage. You know, you might recall in 2016, President Trump talked about his $1 trillion infrastructure plan. That plan is in the same file with his healthcare replacement plan. So nothing happened. It was a lot of talk, but nothing happened. I think with President-elect Biden, you're going to see not only a real commitment, but follow through for several reasons. One, he recognizes with climate change, with the need to replace old infrastructure systems, and also the need to stimulate an economy that's been pretty well ravaged by COVID. Infrastructure is probably one of the best ways to do it, and water infrastructure has to be part of that, as I pointed out in my remarks. The size and scope of this will depend upon my Republican colleagues, particularly in the Senate. And again, that's why it's so urgent that you carry this argument to all quarters of the country and point out how this helps the localities. And if you do that, I think it'll be very, very helpful. But we've had tremendous improvement. I could tell you that if President Trump was reelected, that he'd turn, I think, with the direction of many of my colleagues in the Senate, away from infrastructure into deficit reduction and other things that would essentially leave us once again without any real infrastructure plan of a significant size.
Great, thank you. The second question we got here, again, you've partially addressed a couple of times, but I think that you have many other great things to say to this. How can businesses and the larger advocacy community best help and work with champions like yourself to secure the needed infrastructure funding? You've talked about story sharing. Maybe you could delve into that a little more, maybe some examples of where you've seen that to be useful, or just expand on that.
No, I mean, again, all politics are local. If you know, one of my colleagues, if I felt that this program was just directed at a certain part of the country and had no effect on Rhode Island, I'd look at the merits and it might have bearing, but it wouldn't be as compelling as if, you know, this directly addresses the problem that Rhode Island has. So that's just the nature of what we do. And I think it helps to, to have real anecdotes from the localities. And by the way, some people sort of assume you have to go to Washington and you have to knock on the door in Washington. I have found in my political life that if people can find you in the supermarket and politely mention, not harangue, but politely mention something, they can also find the polling place in that same community. And that has an effect on politicians also. So again, it's this, keep up the dialogue, talk about how this is good for the locality. And I think also too, mobilizing state officials, governors and, Republican governors, Democratic governors, but if they're talking and they talk on a regular basis with the delegation, say, listen, we have a $2 billion sewage problem in this area, and we've got to have federal help and assistance. That helps a lot too. So you can focus your efforts not just on members of Congress, but also key decision makers at the states, the governors or other people like that.
Great. So we have a question here from David Benjamin, and it's a little bit of a long one, but we'll work through it. He was wondering if senators are able to build pathways for U.S. small and medium enterprises to work their way through the state and federal acquisition system to supply sustainable water infrastructures using ecological engineering, as the federal system is very complex and usually contracts are won by very large engineering firms and innovative small and medium enterprises. So it's a more technical question, and yeah.
No, I must tell you, that is a question that is ubiquitous in all procurement. I am the ranking Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and we are wrestling with how do we simplify the rules of acquisition so that small innovative companies who might have better solutions than the big industrial companies, how can they get involved? Because they have the same complaint. It's too complicated. You have to build up long-term relationships with the acquisition authority, all those things. They're not looking aggressively for the innovations. They're just, more of the same is okay with them and makes their life easier. This is a challenge that's faced across the entire federal government. And I think part of it is a reflection of how the economy has changed. I mean, you go back again, 30 years or so, the big companies were the ones that were doing the research, that were making progress, that had the efficiencies, et cetera. You're finding that phenomenon more in smaller companies, innovative, the new research, new technologies, new ideas, but yet they can't break into the system because it's been in place and it's been accreting, if that's the right term, for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So we're trying to deal with that. And as we look at funding for an infrastructure project, we're also going to look at, can this funding get down to small companies with innovation? And so that it's a task of not just putting money on the table, it's making sure it's well directed.
Great, thank you. And I just got a message from Lucas, who's telling me that you need to go.
Yeah. I do whatever Lucas says. So if I would advise you to do that also, Colton.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Senator, for joining us. Really appreciate it, and appreciate all the good work you're doing.
And you keep up the good work. And in many respects, your work is more important. You actually move the needle. Thank you very much.
Well, don't know about that, but thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good day. Bye. All right. So while we're going to go back and give Susan an opportunity to finish up her presentation, and while she's doing that, if anyone has questions for the rest of us, the panel, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A, and when Susan is finished, we'll get to your questions.
Great, thank you. So if you could just advance to slide 7.
Let's see. Is it?
It's the before and after picture, the later one.
Keep going.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect. So before Senator Reed joined us, and I was sharing with examples on how we were using green stormwater infrastructure in the suburban Philadelphia area and how we were addressing these investments in water infrastructure. So I wanted to speak a little bit now about how local businesses are benefiting from this. And Senator Reed gave me a perfect segue. I feel like it was a good place to interject what I was speaking with on the examples. And now I'll share, our local business case as well. So we're implementing green stormwater infrastructures throughout the neighborhood, throughout the city, throughout business and commercial complexes. And this infrastructure installation is reducing damage, flooding, and combined sewer downstream. So in addition to the environmental benefits we're seeing, these projects are also improving the social well-being by creating passive recreational opportunities, access to the creek, and improved habitat. They're creating multifunctional spaces to utilize for birding and hiking and other nature-based activities. They're creating these recreational opportunities to come out and enjoy nature. So research has shown that the creation of these attractive landscapes using nature and trees also helps to reduce crime in our communities. It's increasing property value, and it can improve the health and job satisfaction of office workers. Next slide. So the city of Philadelphia is several years into a 25-year comprehensive nature-based stormwater management plan that's aiming to reduce the city's combined sewer overflows by 85%. This is being accomplished by reducing the amount of stormwater entering the combined stormwater and wastewater systems. And much of that is being done through the implementation of green stormwater infrastructures. So the basin retrofits, the rain gardens, the constructed wetlands, stream restoration, all of these opportunities which mitigate impervious surfaces and reduce the volume of stormwater entering that combined system are helping to alleviate those overflows. So rather than spending what was estimated as $9.6 billion to update the gray infrastructure and separate the combined stormwater and sanitary sewage, the city is instead investing $2.4 billion in public funds matched by private funds by 2036 to create green stormwater infrastructure throughout the city. The rise of green stormwater infrastructure in the greater Philadelphia area is creating and sustaining local jobs and small businesses, including my firm, Cerulean. Implementation of projects employs a wide array of skill set, including surveyors, engineers, landscape architects, landscape nurseries and arborists, general contractors, and maintenance companies who help sustain the green stormwater infrastructure. A study by the Sustainable Business Network of Greater Philadelphia projects the city's efforts will produce a $4 billion benefit in the Philadelphia economy, supporting about 1,000 jobs per year and generating $2 million a year in local tax revenue throughout the performance period of the 25-year plan. So we are improving the environment, supporting small businesses, and creating jobs throughout the economy through implementation of green stormwater infrastructure. And with that, I turn it back over to Colton for questions and answers.
Great, thanks Suzanne, thanks Laura. Covered a lot of material today. We have about 9 minutes left. And so for those of you that have not yet had the opportunity, you can put questions into the question and answer box. I think there's some of you that are doing it in the chat. Try to get to those as well, but it's easier if we all keep it in the Q&A box. So I'm gonna go through and see which of these questions we should address.
Really quickly, Colton, there's been a couple questions about sharing a recording of the webinar or copies of the slides afterwards.
Yes, we will send out all of that in the next few days. We'll copy the webinar, copy the slides, and probably some other follow-up materials. Okay, so sorry, going through these. So we've got one question from Richard Lawton. What are the keys to making sure that all new developments incorporate GSI? And how about in redevelopment efforts? And I think this would be best directed towards Susan.
Sure, and so we do have local ordinances in place that look at redevelopment practices within the greater Philadelphia area and throughout Pennsylvania. And for redevelopment, it looks at an impervious surface, but also then quantifying that impervious surface as 20% meadow. So when you have to define your management of that green space, you're not just taking it from impervious. So it's actually providing a stronger requirement for implementing green stormwater infrastructure. And these regulations have also then shifted to not just looking at rate control, but also volume. So infiltration testing is being required, geotechnical studies for new development is being required, and practices such as rain gardens and extended flow paths within our stormwater basins, permanent pool elevations, all of these water quality factors are now being incorporated into both new development and redevelopment projects.
Great, thanks. We have another question. Are there any business sectors or business trade groups that oppose water infrastructure investment? If so, what are their objections? And that's a great question. To my knowledge, water infrastructure does seem to be something that a variety of diverse groups can get behind. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has called for increased investments in water infrastructure investment as well. We do see more opposition from certain trade groups to more regulatory efforts. I would say, you know, there's of course going to be people that are worried about the deficit, trade groups that are worried about the deficit, that are going to likely oppose any sort of large efforts like the ones that we're calling for here, and as the senator's calling for, was calling for earlier. Susan, Laura, would you like to add anything to that, or any knowledge of that?
I think that about sums it up. Water infrastructure is one of those cool topics where so many different sectors come together in support of something. I think we're pretty fortunate to be advocating for something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Still difficult to get it done though.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Other questions. We have a comment here. Clean water issues can reach across political differences. Spokane, this is from Pam Gallagher. Spokane's Republican mayor never imagined championing the city's most expensive infrastructure project. The Spokane River and local economy is better for it. There's some good links there, and I think that actually speaks to the potential bipartisanship we were discussing earlier. There was, maybe Laura, you could address this question because you've done some research in Rhode Island. Pamela Nurana has asked, are areas of Rhode Island starting to experience seawater intrusion to their wells due to rising sea levels associated with climate change? For the senator, that was maybe addressed towards the senator, but is that something you've done any research on by chance?
I have not found instances of that yet, although I just a little while ago lived in Delaware, which I think is in a similar position to Rhode Island with sea level rise. It's also sinking. Fun fact, Delaware is sinking as the seas are rising. And most people in southern Delaware are using private wells for their drinking water. So I'm going to compare the two of them and say that while I didn't come across examples of this happening in Rhode Island, I have not also heard of anything like that in Delaware yet. That's not to say that it won't happen soon. And I think it's something that a lot of local groups are looking at, like municipalities and towns.
Great. Susan, I got a question for you. What sorts of potential impacts for green stormwater infrastructure do you see on the neighborhood and Green Street level for creating value in communities and for businesses?
Sure. So, and also I see that Richard had a second part to his question, which is in line with what you had just asked as well. And that is, you know, how are we successfully raising funds for GSI while incentivizing residents and businesses? And there are programs throughout the greater Philadelphia area and in other communities where residents are being encouraged and businesses are being encouraged. And you know, for example, in Philadelphia, there is a rain check program, which offers small scale green stormwater infrastructure on residential properties. We also have a program which is called Stream Smart. And similarly, residents are being provided technical support and encouragement and sometimes funding to implement these type of projects within their communities and oftentimes aggregated throughout the communities. So looking to where we can do just that, create green streets. So, you know, intercepting some of the flow through a shallow green inlet on the roadway and putting it through a vegetated system or through a subsurface system. And these programs are being incentivized, you know, either through stormwater utilities or through other private programs, and that can contribute funds to this. Within Philadelphia, you know, the Green City Clean Waters Plan also, you know, provides the stormwater fees, and that is redistributed through a regranting program. So a property owner with a large impervious surface, they are able to reduce their fee by implementing green stormwater infrastructure on their property. So they can, through the fees that have been paid into this program, they can apply to do these type of stormwater management improvements and then get a fee reduction. So, you know, this is very, we would really encourage large impervious landowners to do this and implement green stormwater infrastructure on their properties.
Great. And a question for Laura from, just had it here. It was in regards to the letter, the business sign-on letter. And the question was,